The dining room at Pearl and Oak shimmered in candlelight and quiet clinks of silver. It was the kind of place where conversations floated above $80 entrees, and no one raised their voice. From the velvet banquettes to the perfectly folded napkins, every detail whispered money. Mara Quinn weaved through the maze of tables like someone trained for it because she was. Years of working doubles had sculpted her steps into silence. Her black apron was tied neatly, her hair pinned back without a strand out of place, and the plates balanced on her arm didn't tremble even when the weight pulled at her shoulder. At table 9, laughter cut through the low hum, the kind that didn't belong here. Loud, performed. A man in a sand-colored blazer, expensive, obviously custom, lifted a glass of wine and nodded toward her as she approached. "There she is," he said, the grin already forming. "We were just talking about whether you think Whitford should buy Vertex Tech or not." The men at the table laughed. One of them let out a low whistle. Another said something about Wall Street meets Waitress and leaned back to enjoy the joke. Mara placed the last plate down with care. She didn't flinch. Not yet. Silas Whitford didn't laugh. He simply watched her elbow on the table, fingers touching his lips. His hair was steel gray at the temples, and his posture was as controlled as a held breath. This was his table. His restaurant, unofficially Pearl and Oak, ran smoother when he was seated in the back corner, surrounded by tailored suits and stock talk. "You've got a name tag, right?" he asked, voice soft but clear. Mara looked at him. Directly for the first time. Mara. "Well, Mara," he said, drawing out the vowels like a drawl you ever have opinions about $40 billion acquisitions. She knew the rules. Smile, shrug. Say, "Not my world, sir," and disappear like smoke. Let them laugh, let them be right. But that name Vertex Tech rattled something in her. Something she'd buried so deep it had taken 3 years and a different name just to stop dreaming about it. She turned slowly, the warm glow from the table flickering across her face. Her eyes landed on the edge of Silas's briefcase, half-zipped papers poking out printed spreadsheets and acquisition memos she recognized before she could stop herself. She spoke softly, but with clarity that cut through the air like glass. "You're walking into a trap." The laughter stopped. Forks paused mid-air. Wine glasses hovered without sips. Silas blinked once. "Excuse me?" Mara didn't answer. She glanced down at the table, 3 empty plates, 1 untouched. His. "Enjoy your dinner," she said, stepping away, but she felt it. His eyes didn't leave her. The air behind her felt heavy with thought, with silence, with something shifting. In the kitchen, Miguel raised an eyebrow as she passed by. "What did they say to you now?" "Same as always," she muttered, tying her apron tighter. But her hands were shaking. Because it wasn't just that he'd said, Vertex Tech. It was the name on the footer of the document she'd glimpsed Ross Holdings. Caleb Ross. A name that tasted like acid in her mouth. A name she hadn't said aloud in 3 years. She clocked out early, said she wasn't feeling well. Miguel waved her off kindly, no questions. That was the thing about restaurant families. When someone's quiet turned sharp, you didn't ask why. She walked home. Her apartment was a 400-square-foot box above a closed-down bar on East 6th. It smelled like old leather and fading neon. She kept the lights low, the windows shut. The kitchen was barely usable, but the coffee maker still worked, and that was enough. She sat on the edge of her bed with a cup in her hands. Her name was Mara Quinn. She'd been living in Austin for 2 years and 7 months. Before that, a town outside Fort Worth. Before that, silence. And before that, she was Marianne Qureshi, the forensic analyst who'd built a system that could trace financial manipulation across continents, and the woman whose own code had been used to frame her for $600 million in fraud. They said she vanished. Headlines called her the ghost accountant. The FBI looked, the media speculated. They stopped looking. She stared at her laptop for a long time before opening it. She didn't log in. She just looked at the startup screen like it might give her answers. Whitford, Vertex, Ross. It was happening again, and this time someone else was the target. She rubbed her temples and closed the screen. She didn't owe anyone anything. Not anymore. Her life was small now, quiet. It was safe. But she couldn't forget the look in Silas's eyes. Not mocking, not cruel. He had been listening. The next morning she found an envelope at the back door of the restaurant. Her name, Mara not Marianne, was scrawled on the front in thick pen. Inside a business card. Silas Whitford, founder and CEO, Whitford and Kofroif. Capital. On the back in blue ink, "If you're right, come tell me. If you're wrong, I'll forget your name." She sat in the alley behind the restaurant, holding that card like it might catch fire in her hand. The sun rose. Delivery trucks groaned. Kitchen staff buzzed inside. Mara didn't move, because she knew something she had no business knowing anymore. And someone was about to lose everything if she kept it to herself. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. 3 years earlier, the view from the 48th floor of the Lockridge Tower glittered like it had been designed to impress people who didn't get impressed easily. Downtown Dallas pulsed with late-night lights. Below, cars moved like coins rolling down glass. But Marianne Qureshi barely looked up from her screen. Her office was quiet, the hum of the building a soft undertone. On her monitor, a river of numbers flowed, transfers, cross-border transactions, holding patterns. The code pulsed gently like a language only she understood. And it did feel like a language. She had written half of it from scratch. Behind her, the door opened. She didn't have to turn around. Working late again came the voice, smooth, familiar, always one sentence away from charming. Marianne glanced over her shoulder. Caleb Ross stood with his jacket folded over his arm shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. His tie hung loose like he hadn't been planning to come back, but did anyway. "You're here," she said. Not quite a question. "You found something, didn't you?" She hesitated, then swiveled her chair to face him fully. Her voice was steady, but her pulse wasn't. "Caleb, there are microtransactions showing up across dummy vendors, all routed through shells I can't trace past 3 layers, but the movement is too clean, too intentional." Caleb didn't blink. He stepped inside, set his jacket on the guest chair. "And I think—" Her throat tightened. "I think someone's skimming hundreds of thousands in just the last 2 months, probably more." Silence stretched between them. Then Caleb exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. "You're incredible," he said, almost admiring. "I thought maybe another analyst would catch it first. But of course it's you." Marianne felt the floor tilt. "What?" He smiled, but it wasn't warm. "Not really. You always see too much." She remembered everything about that moment. The chill in her hands. The way he leaned against the desk like it was still a normal Tuesday night. The way he said, "You always see too much," like it was a compliment and a threat at the same time. By Friday, her keycard had stopped working. By Monday, federal agents were calling her by name. And by the following Thursday, she was gone. Back in the present, Mara sat in the corner of a quiet coffee shop off South Congress, the business card from Silas Whitford folded and refolded between her fingers. Outside the window, Austin moved in that slow, hot way it did in early spring, a city in no rush to tell you its secrets. Her coffee sat untouched. "Are you going?" The voice pulled her out of the fog. Laurel King had just walked in, tall, composed, with dark curls tucked behind her ears and a lawyer's cautious gaze. She looked more like a portrait than a person someone you'd expect in courtrooms or boardrooms, not ordering oat milk lattes at corner shops. "I wasn't expecting you," Mara said. Laurel set her bag down, took the seat across from her without asking. "Silas asked me to talk to you. He doesn't like being caught off guard." Mara offered a thin smile. "He wasn't the only one." Laurel didn't smile back. "You spooked him. That takes effort. I didn't mean to," Mara said. Then, after a beat, "Well, maybe I did." Laurel folded her hands. "You used the phrase walking into a trap at a public table. You don't think that deserves a follow-up? I wasn't planning a follow-up," Mara said quietly. "I didn't even know I still cared." Laurel studied her for a moment, then leaned in her voice, softer. "Then why did you say anything at all?" Mara looked out the window. "Because I saw the papers in his briefcase. And I saw a name I haven't seen since my life fell apart." Mara nodded once. Laurel exhaled, sat back. "Silas doesn't make emotional decisions. If you're trying to shake him, you won't. If you're trying to help him, you need to do more than throw one sentence at him in a restaurant." Mara's jaw tightened. "I wasn't trying to help him. Then why did you stay awake all night holding his card?" Mara flinched. Laurel's voice softened again. "You don't know me. I get that. But I know what it's like to hold something that could explode everything and still want to walk away. So let's skip the dance. Do you have something he needs to see?" "Yes," Mara said. "Then come show him." "I can't. Why not?" "Because once I do," Mara said, her voice cracking at the edges, "I'm not invisible anymore." The table went quiet. Laurel didn't rush the silence. She just waited. Finally, Mara looked up. "Does he trust you?" Laurel hesitated. "He trusts my loyalty. That's not what I asked." "No," Laurel said honestly. "He doesn't trust anyone. But he listens. And if you're right, he'll listen to you." Mara's throat felt dry. "And if I'm wrong, then you disappear again," Laurel said simply. "Back to coffee shops and folded aprons. But you'll know you tried." Mara reached for her cup, took a sip. It had gone cold. "Tell him I'll come," she said finally, "but on one condition." Laurel raised a brow. "I want no press, no exposure, no office tour or announcement. I walk in through the back door, I sit in a room, and I look at numbers. That's all?" Laurel smiled, just barely. "He likes back doors." She stood up, gathering her things. "I'll tell him you'll be there tomorrow at 9. Mara paused. "You're sure?" "No," Laurel said over her shoulder. "But you are." When Mara stepped outside, the air was thick with late afternoon sun. A breeze lifted her hair. She clutched the business card in her hand, now creased and faded around the edges. Her old life wasn't chasing her anymore. She was walking toward it, and whatever waited behind those mirrored towers and perfect conference tables, she'd face it. Not as Marianne, not as a ghost, as Mara Quinn, the woman they thought had vanished. Whitford & Co. didn't look like the kind of place that needed saving. The headquarters stretched 42 stories above Lady Bird Lake, all glass and steel and power. Even the sidewalks out front felt quieter, like the world lowered its voice near money. Inside the lobby was marble and hush. No piped-in music, no wasted words, just the low murmur of conversations that could shift markets. Mara stood just inside the revolving door, feeling like she'd stepped into the bones of a past life. Her blouse was pressed. Her shoes were quiet. Her ID badge, temporary blank no name, hung like a dare around her neck. The receptionist glanced up. "Ms. Quinn?" "Yes. You'll be escorted to Mr. Whitford's private conference room." Mara gave a small nod. She didn't ask for details. She didn't need to. The elevator opened on the 39th floor into a space that felt like it had been carved from silence. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the room with gray light. A long table stretched toward a city skyline that blurred into morning haze. Coffee waited in a glass carafe. No sugar. No cream. Silas Whitford stood near the window, his back turned. He didn't move when she entered. "You really came?" I said I would. He turned. The man who had once smirked at her over steak was gone. What faced her now was measured, calculating a man who'd built and kept an empire through decisions no one else wanted to make. "I reviewed what you said," he began, "and I'll admit, I didn't sleep much that night. I didn't mean to cause a scene. Didn't you?" His voice was flat, not accusing. "Just curious." Mara met his gaze. "No, but I meant what I said." Silas nodded once. "So tell me what you think I'm walking into." Mara stepped forward. Her voice when she spoke was calm, but edged in steel. "Vertex Tech looks clean, lean overhead, great media buzz, IPO, whispers. But their value is artificially inflated. What they're hiding is buried in their licensing structure under a company called Kestrel Holdings." She paused, which traces back to a group of offshore accounts linked to Ross Holdings. Silas narrowed his eyes. Caleb Ross. Her silence answered for her. Silas walked to the table, poured himself coffee. The stillness felt heavy. "I've only met the man once. Charismatic, smart, arrogant. He's more than that," Mara said. "He's a strategist, and he doesn't make moves unless he's already 10 steps in." Silas sipped his coffee, then set the cup down. "What's your connection?" Mara's hands curled against her sides. "I built the system he's using. Years ago. And then he used it to make me look like a thief." Silas studied her. "You were the analyst at Lockridge. Qureshi." Her breath hitched. She hadn't heard that name out loud in years. "I was. I read the case. Briefly. The numbers were impossible to trace. No real proof. Because the proof was buried." She swallowed. "Because I buried it. To stay alive." Silas didn't speak for a long moment. Then quietly, "You're asking me to trust someone who disappeared, who lied about who she is, who walked into my restaurant carrying plates and now tells me I'm being hunted." She nodded once. "Yes." "And why should I? Because if I'm wrong, you lose nothing. But if I'm right, you lose everything." Silas walked back toward the window. His reflection in the glass looked tired. "Older. I don't like being manipulated, neither do I." He turned. "Why come back now? I didn't plan to." Her voice cracked just slightly. "I was surviving. That's all. But when I saw your briefcase, when I heard Caleb's name..." She shook her head. Something shifted. "I couldn't walk away again." The silence stretched. Then Silas walked to a side table, pulled out a slim black folder, and slid it across to her. "This is everything we have on the acquisition, minus what legal is still vetting. You'll review it here. No copies, no leaks. You'll work under Laurel's observation." Mara reached for the folder. Her fingers brushed his. He paused. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly. "I get that a lot." "Do you trust yourself?" he asked, voice low. "It wasn't a question about spreadsheets, not really." "I trust what I see," she said, "even when it hurts." There was something in his expression then, not warmth exactly, but understanding. Like two people who'd both built empires no one saw and paid in silence to protect them. "You'll start now," he said. "Thank you." But as she moved to the far end of the table, he said one more thing. "If you're lying, Mara, I'll know." She didn't look back. "I'm not." Later, Laurel joined her in the room. She carried a tablet and a file of her own, her heels silent on the hardwood floor. "I don't know what game you're playing," Laurel said without sitting, "but Silas doesn't gamble." Mara didn't stop flipping pages. Neither do I. You sure this is about justice? Mara looked up. What else would it be about? Laurel stared for a moment. People come here with a story. Some want revenge, some want redemption. The ones who make it, they usually want something else. Like what Laurel shrugged. A future. Mara went back to the documents. Then maybe I want that too. And for the first time in 3 years, she meant it. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The documents didn't lie. Vertex Tech's glossy surface was all illusion numbers polished until they sparkled, but just beneath the floorboards were rotting. Mara sat hunched at the far end of the conference table as the sun shifted through the skyline, casting gold across the polished wood. Her finger traced the same line of data for the 5th time. She didn't need to reread it. She just couldn't stop staring. She remembered building systems like this back when she was Mary Ann. Back when people used to listen when she spoke. Every instinct in her told her what this was: a shell game, perfectly timed, perfectly hidden. The same blueprint Caleb had used before, only this time it was tighter, more daring. It had his fingerprints all over it. And yet, without something concrete, it was all still just a whisper in a hurricane. The door opened. She didn't turn. I figured you'd still be here, Laurel said, setting a new folder beside her. More filings just came through. Mara nodded. Thanks. Laurel didn't leave. Instead, she sat across from her, leaning in. Can I ask you something personal? Mara blinked. You already have. Laurel smiled faintly. Fair, but this one's more direct. Mara closed the file. Go on. What did it feel like when it all fell apart? The question hung there, sharp, unflinching. Mara's jaw tightened, like falling, not fast, just endlessly, like waking up every day inside a version of yourself that you don't recognize. Laurel's eyes didn't move. I was 29, Mara said, at the top of my field. And then in less than a week, I was no one. No job, no voice. And the worst part wasn't losing the career. It was losing my own story. I didn't get to tell it. Caleb told it for me. And people believed him. Laurel leaned back slowly. So this with Silas is what your rewrite? No, Mara said. This is my correction. They sat in silence for a beat. Then Laurel's voice shifted. He's watching, you know. Mara glanced at her. Silas. Laurel nodded. He doesn't miss much. And he's curious. I haven't seen him this unsettled in years. I didn't come here to unsettle him. You sure? Mara looked away. Why does that matter? Because people like Silas don't just let people in. If he does, it's for a reason. And what's mine? Mara asked. Laurel hesitated, then stood. That's what I'm trying to figure out. She left the room quietly. Mara sighed and leaned back in her chair, stretching the ache out of her shoulders. The data was still open in front of her, but her eyes drifted towards the window. Down below, Austin glowed in the late afternoon light, bustling oblivious. How many people down there had no idea that billions of dollars were being moved like chess pieces right above their heads? Her phone buzzed. It wasn't her real phone. That one was still in a box at the bottom of her closet. This was the number Laurel had set up, linked to a secure line. She picked it up. One new message. Private appointment. 6:30. Whitford's residence. Bring what you've got. She stared at the screen for a full minute before locking it. Silas's residence. Not the office, not the boardroom. She didn't like the shift. It felt personal, and personal was dangerous. But she went anyway. The address led her to Westlake Hills, where the streets curled like ribbons through private gates, and the homes looked more like quiet museums. Silas's house sat back from the road, modern, and glass perched against the slope, like it had been born from the hill itself. A woman in black opened the door before she knocked. Ms. Quinn, he's expecting you. The foyer was warm, minimalist, almost too quiet. Silas stood near a long window overlooking the city, 2 glasses of wine in his hands. He held one out. No pressure? Just wine. She took it without drinking. Why here, she asked. Because I don't want this conversation in a building with ears. He gestured toward a small sitting area with no screens, no distractions, just low light and clean lines. They sat. I've read your notes, he said. You've identified several anomalies, but so far it's all circumstantial. I'm aware. Caleb's smart. He doesn't leave fingerprints, and right now you're the only one saying his name. I'm not guessing, she said. I recognize the structure. He's reusing the same blueprint he used to frame me, only now it's scaled up, and you're the only one who can see it. She held his gaze. Yes. Silas sipped his wine. Do you know how many people try to get my attention? How many walk into rooms thinking they can impress me? You're the first one who did it by telling me I was about to lose everything. I wasn't trying to impress you. That's what makes it interesting. He stood walking to the window. I built my company on instincts, he said. On reading people. Deals aren't about numbers, they're about who's holding the pen. She stood too slowly. And what does your instinct say now? He turned to face her. It says you're telling the truth. But that doesn't mean I know what you want. Mara's voice dropped. I want him to stop winning. Silas studied her face for a long moment. You're not just trying to stop him. You're trying to undo what he did to you. She said nothing. He walked toward her, slow, deliberate. Let me be clear. If you help me kill this deal, you'll be helping me save my company. But if you're looking for justice, real justice, I can't promise that. I'm not looking for a hero, Mara said. I just need someone who's not afraid to pull back the curtain. Silas nodded once. Then we understand each other. He offered a hand. Not like a CEO, not like a man making a deal, something quieter. She shook it. And for the first time since they met, she didn't feel like a waitress pretending to belong. She felt seen. The next morning, Mara stepped into the 39th floor war room with a knot already forming in her stomach. It was early, barely past 7, but the space buzzed with quiet tension. Screens flickered, phones hummed, and the scent of strong coffee hung in the air like a warning. She carried her own mug black from the corner cafe and a folder tucked under her arm. The documents weren't dramatic. They didn't scream fraud, but they whispered inconsistencies. Enough whispers, and the room might start listening. A few heads turned as she walked in, including Laurel's. The rest kept working. At the far end of the room stood a man Mara hadn't seen before. He was mid-40s, sharp suit, sharp expression, the kind of man who didn't look up from his phone unless the building was on fire. Morning, Laurel said as Mara approached. You're early, so are you. Laurel nodded toward the man. That's Devin Chase, head of strategy. He's the reason half this deal exists. Mara followed her gaze. Is he expecting me? No, Laurel said, her voice cool. But he's about to. Mara didn't reply. She walked to her assigned desk in the corner, the one Silas had promised would be out of the way, but in reality was strategically placed near everything. She opened her laptop. A familiar hum greeted her. She liked the sound, like something waking up. Devin approached 10 minutes later. You're the consultant, he said without introducing himself. Mara didn't look up. I am. He stepped closer. We've already reviewed Vertex from every angle. Audits are clean. Projections are solid. So forgive me for asking, but what exactly are you doing here? She glanced up, unbothered. Looking for what you missed? His eyes narrowed. I built half this strategy, he said. There's nothing to find. Then I'll be done soon, she said calmly. He stared at her for a second longer than necessary, then smiled. We'll see. He walked away. Laurel appeared beside her, arms crossed. That went well. He's rattled. He's territorial. Mara smirked. Same thing. By mid-morning, she had 3 spreadsheets open, 4 browser tabs running, and a wall of notes forming. The pattern was emerging buried filings, off-record valuations, and a series of purchase orders that didn't match Vertex's claimed supply chain. It wasn't hard to see once you looked at the right angles. It never was. What surprised her was the sense of rhythm, returning the familiar click of thought, the ease with which the numbers unfolded. It felt like slipping into her own skin again after years of pretending it didn't fit. Around 11, Silas entered the room. Not with a grand entrance, just a quiet presence that made people sit straighter. He met Mara's eyes, briefly offered the smallest nod, then joined Devon in a conversation by the main display wall. She watched them from the corner of her eye. Devon gestured toward a graph, speaking quickly. Silas didn't interrupt. Just listened. He had the posture of someone who'd learned to wait for truths to reveal themselves. Mara looked back at her screen. Another document opened. Another breadcrumb. The system had been designed to mislead a trail of minor mistakes, plausible explanations, and just enough legitimate data to survive scrutiny. But there, hidden in a quarterly vendor update from a year ago, was a purchase order from a holding company in Luxembourg. It was nearly identical to one Caleb had used back in the Lockridge days. Mara's heart skipped. She opened her private notes, compared the 2 entries side by side. It was his. She didn't need confirmation. She knew the structure, the cadence of the deception. She had spent years trying to forget it. Now it stared back at her. Laurel leaned over. You found something. I found him. Laurel blinked. What do you mean? Mara said, voice low. He's already in the system. This isn't a potential risk. It's active. She stood, folder in hand. I need to talk to Silas. Now, yes. Laurel moved with her, cutting between desks, intercepting Devon mid-sentence. Excuse me. Mara needs a moment. Devon scowled. We're in the middle of she has something. Silas looked from Laurel to Mara. Go on. Mara opened the folder, laying it across the table between them. This vendor Apex Lineage is a holding company disguised as a supplier. They don't manufacture anything, but according to this, they've been paid nearly $11 million over the past 18 months. Devon leaned in. That's standard outsourcing. No, Mara said. It's standard money laundering, and this, she pointed to a transfer dated just before Vertex's last valuation bump, is exactly how Caleb Ross structured payouts through shell companies in the Lockridge case. Same bank chain, same foreign partner. Silas didn't blink. Devon's jaw tightened. That's a bold accusation. It's a pattern, Mara said. And patterns don't lie. Silas lifted the folder. How fast can you tie this to the acquisition pipeline? I'm working on it now. He nodded once. Continue. Mara turned to leave, but Devon stepped closer. You're building a narrative out of shadows, he said. Don't expect everyone to applaud your ghost story. Mara looked at him, calm and unshaken. Ghosts don't need applause. Just the truth. She returned to her desk. Her hands were steady now, and somewhere deep inside all the static she felt it again, that edge of purpose. The storm hadn't started, but she was already in the center of it. Mara didn't hear much for the rest of the day. Not because there was silence, the war room churned with quiet urgency, but because she had disappeared into the data. Her headphones weren't in. Her screen wasn't unusually loud. But she was submerged. She knew what she was looking for now. Apex Lineage wasn't a fluke. It was a doorway. The question was what lay behind it. Her code whispered back to her in fragments, behaviors, delays, uneven timestamps. It was like running into an old friend you never wanted to see again, but couldn't ignore. The feeling sat in her chest like a cold knot. Around 4, Laurel set a coffee down beside her elbow without a word. Mara glanced up, surprised, then offered a quiet thanks. Laurel didn't leave. She pulled a chair beside her and leaned in. "You know," Laurel said softly for someone who didn't want attention, "you've got the room spinning." Mara smiled without humor. "I'm used to being stared at, usually in courtrooms." Devon's pushing back hard. "He's already called a partner meeting for tomorrow. Said your analysis could jeopardize investor trust." "Good," Mara said. Laurel arched a brow. "It should," she added. "If trust depends on ignoring red flags, we've already lost." Laurel didn't disagree. She looked at the lines of code, the graphs, the notes layered across Mara's screen. "I couldn't do what you're doing," she said finally. "I'm trained to find truth in testimony. But this," she gestured at the monitor. "This feels like reading a language no one taught me." Mara paused, resting her hands on the keyboard. "It's pattern and silence," she said. "Fraud doesn't scream. It hides in the empty fields, the missing decimals, the odd timing. You have to look for what's not there." Laurel watched her for a moment longer. "Did you ever think about walking away from all of this every day?" Mara said. "Until the day I realized hiding wasn't the same as healing." She meant it, and saying it out loud surprised her. At 5:30, the room thinned. People left with the usual nods and stiff goodbyes. Only a handful remained, heads down, including Devon, still on a call, pacing near the glass wall, like he was trying to contain something that wanted to escape. Mara didn't move. Neither did Laurel. It wasn't until close to 6 that Silas appeared again without warning. He stood beside Mara's desk, arms crossed, no greeting. "What do you have?" he asked. Mara didn't hesitate. Apex Lineage is one of 3 shell entities with payments routed through Luxembourg. All are tagged as vendor services, but none have working websites, no staff, no production logs, and all 3 are tied to a parent company that links indirectly to a fund managed by Ross Holdings. Silas's expression didn't change. "That's one thread," Mara continued, voice steady. "But the real story's in the reporting lag. Vertex claims quarterly reviews, but financial data tied to those vendors has a 17-day discrepancy every time, which means something is being edited after the period closes." "You're sure?" Silas asked. "Yes," Laurel cut in. "It's the same tactic Caleb used before. Mara knows the architecture. It's familiar." Silas nodded slowly. "Can you prove it in a boardroom?" "Not yet," Mara admitted. "But I'm close." He didn't press further. Instead, he turned to Laurel. "I want Devon briefed tonight." Laurel stiffened. "You don't think I want to see his reaction?" Silas said simply. Laurel left without another word. Silas lingered, eyes still on Mara. "You didn't come here to save this company," he said. "You came here to finish something." Mara met his gaze. "Is that a problem?" "No." He gave a slight smile. "It's just not what I expected." She looked away. "Neither were you." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Do you know what I thought when you said, 'You're walking into a trap'?" She waited. "I thought, finally, someone isn't afraid of me." Mara blinked. "I'm not interested in being feared," he said, "but I'm surrounded by people who mistake compliance for loyalty. And you think I'm loyal? I think you're dangerous?" Silas said, then added quietly, "And I think that's what we need right now." For a moment, something shifted in the air, not romantic, not exactly, but a hum of recognition, like 2 people standing on opposite cliffs, seeing each other clearly for the first time. He broke the silence. "I'll see you in the morning." Mara watched him walk away, the lines of his suit clean against the fading light. When the door clicked shut behind him, she sat back in her chair. dangerous. It wasn't the worst thing someone had called her, but this time it felt less like an accusation and more like a beginning. The next morning, the tension in the building felt different. It wasn't the usual pressure of closing numbers or investor calls. It was quieter, heavier, like everyone sensed something moving beneath the surface, but didn't want to be the first to speak its name. Mara arrived early before most lights on the 39th floor had even flickered on. The city below was still wrapped in the last threads of morning mist. From up here, Austin looked like a model of itself. Neat, controlled, deceptive. She set her coffee down and logged in her fingers, moving faster than her thoughts. The trail she'd uncovered yesterday still looped through her mind. Apex lineage, the vendor delays the offshore connections. It was all there, but it wasn't enough. She needed something undeniable. Her screen loaded, and then an alert. An external device had pinged the network around 3:47 a.m. She froze. The device wasn't registered, but the access point matched her system ID. Mara leaned in heartbeat quickening. Someone had copied her credentials, not just mirrored, reconstructed. Only one person had ever known how to do that. Caleb. She stared at the screen. The access had been brief. 2 files copied, both labeled as unrelated vendor invoices, but their size was too large. Their metadata had been scrubbed. They were hiding something. She pulled up the logs, tracking the bounce. Whoever it was, they'd routed it through 3 internal nodes and a private address listed under one of Whitford's dormant sub-companies. Someone inside this building had helped. Mara. She jumped. Laurel stood just behind her coat, still on a puzzled look in her eyes. "You okay?" Mara swallowed. "I need to talk to Silas. Now." Laurel hesitated. "He's in with Devon, reviewing numbers before the board meets. This can't wait." Laurel nodded. "I'll let him know." While she walked off, Mara opened the copied files. Password protected. Encrypted. Her fingers hesitated over the keys. She tried one phrase, then another. Finally, she typed in a code she hadn't used in 3 years, Core 7291, her old analyst ID. The file opened, and what she saw made her lean back, breath leaving her like a pulled thread. It wasn't just vendor data, it was internal communications. Emails between Devon and a firm called ArcLight Analytics, one of Vertex Tech's so-called independent auditors. Only they weren't independent. They'd been sending reports directly to an executive address at Ross Holdings. She scrolled further. An attachment. A memo labeled Prepared Talking Points for Silas Whitford, Acquisition Defense Strategy. The date on the memo was from 2 weeks before Mara had ever stepped into that restaurant. Devon had already been planning a backup narrative in case the deal drew scrutiny. He knew. He'd known. Her screen went dim just as the door to the floor opened, and Silas walked in, Laurel close behind him. He didn't say anything, just gestured toward his office. She followed. Inside, the walls felt closer than usual. The city stretched outside, but the only thing Mara could see was the look in Silas's eyes, expectant, focused, a touch, guarded. She placed the printed memo on his desk. He didn't sit. "This was accessed using my credentials at 3:47 this morning," she said. "From an internal device routed through a dormant company shell tied to your old logistics arm. Someone with deep clearance helped." Silas looked at the memo. Devon, yes. His jaw tightened. Mara's voice lowered. "He's not just trying to protect the deal. He's involved, at least partially." The emails trace back to Ross Holdings. Silas picked up the memo, scanned it, then dropped it onto the table like it burned. "I trusted him," he said softly. "That's why it worked." He met her eyes. "Can you prove the documents weren't planted? if they were someone went to extraordinary lengths to forge internal vendor databases and mimic access patterns. "It's possible," she said, "but unlikely." He took a long breath. "And Caleb? He's behind the curtain. He's setting it all up the same way he did before. Fake valuations, outside firms that report what he wants, and now he's using your own executive team to keep it alive." Silas turned away, running a hand through his hair. Mara stepped closer. "Silas, I know this feels like a trap you can't escape, but it isn't. We're ahead of him for now. If we move carefully, we can unwind it before he pulls the trigger. And if we're wrong, then I disappear again," Mara said, voice steady. "But you won't be the one who loses." He looked at her. Really looked. The kind of look that didn't scan your face, but something behind it. "I keep trying to decide if you're my biggest risk," he said, "or my best shot." Mara felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear. Something quieter. Warmer. "Maybe I'm both." Neither of them moved. Then Silas said more quietly, "What would you do next?" She exhaled. "I'd isolate Devon, watch his moves, and pull every backdoor financial report from ArcLight going back 2 years. Silas nodded slowly. "Do it." Mara turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "Silas." He looked up. "You said you trusted Devon?" "I did." "And me?" Silas hesitated. Just for a moment, then said, "I don't trust easily." She nodded. "Neither do I." When she stepped back into the war room, the lights felt sharper, the air tighter. Laurel approached, eyes searching her face. "What happened? Everything's changing," Mara said. Then her eyes drifted across the room to where Devon stood with his back to her, casually sipping his coffee. He hadn't seen her yet. He would. And when he did, he'd realize something far worse than exposure was happening. She wasn't hiding anymore. Mara sat in the corner of the war room, headphones loosely resting around her neck, though no music played. Her screen glowed in front of her, but her eyes weren't on it. She was watching Devon. He moved through the space like nothing had changed, confident, sharp, giving instructions with that calm, measured tone that made him sound like a leader. But now she knew better. Every smooth word was cover. Every calculated smile was performance. And he hadn't looked her way once. That meant he was either overconfident or nervous. Laurel approached quietly, a small tablet in hand. "Pull from ArcLight's compliance branch," Mara said before Laurel even spoke. "Their signatures won't match. I just saw a payment route flagged from their London arm that doesn't track with U.S. reporting requirements. I need to compare." Laurel handed her the tablet. "Already pulled. And I think you're right, the reports sent to our compliance team are different from the ones submitted to the UK database. Slightly, but enough." Mara's fingers paused on the keyboard. "That's the gap. That's how they're doing it," a low voice interrupted. "Doing what, Devon?" He stood just behind them, hands in his pockets, face unreadable. Mara didn't flinch. Laurel straightened slightly, but didn't move away. Mara closed the screen slowly and looked up. "You ever ask yourself why a company that's supposedly clean has 2 versions of the same audit?" she said. Devon's brow lifted slightly. "Not sure what you're implying." "Sure you are," Mara said, standing. Her voice was calm, almost casual. "You're just hoping I won't say it out loud." Laurel glanced between them, tension creeping up her spine. Devon stepped closer. "I've given this company 10 years of my life. I don't take kindly to being accused in the middle of my own floor. And I don't take kindly to being erased," Mara replied, eyes locking with his. "But here we are." Devon leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "You want to be careful, Mara. Your theory's thin, your evidence circumstantial, you build your case wrong, and you're not just out of here. You're discredited again. For good." She smiled. "See, that's where you're wrong. I've already been ruined once. There's nothing left to take from me." For a moment his face changed, something flickering behind the mask. But it vanished as quickly as it came. He walked off without another word. Laurel exhaled. Okay, that was fun. Mara sank back into her chair, adrenaline cooling. He's unraveling, or he's just good at hiding it. No, Mara said, opening a new file. He's trying to scare me, which means we're close. Laurel looked at the open screen. So what's next? We build the timeline, Mara said. Every dollar, every signature. And when it's ready, we walk it into Silas's board meeting and pull the curtain down in front of everyone. You really think Silas will let that happen in public? I don't think he'll stop me. They worked in silence for the next hour, fingers tapping in rhythm, a kind of coded duet. Files opened and closed, timestamps matched, figures aligned. They were drawing a map now, not just of fraud, but of manipulation, of ambition corrupted. Shortly after noon, Mara stepped away from the desk and headed toward the rooftop terrace, a quiet space rarely used except for calls or brief escapes. She needed air. The sun was high, filtering through the glass rails and warming the stone beneath her feet. The city buzzed below a hum of movement and distraction. She leaned on the railing, letting the light hit her face. I was hoping I'd find you up here. Silas's voice came from behind. She turned, surprised but not startled. Don't you have a board to wrangle? Not for another hour? He stepped beside her, not too close, not too far. Just there. You looked like you needed a break. Mara exhaled softly. I've been living in spreadsheets and lies all day, so yeah, I needed 5 minutes. Silas smiled faintly. You know, when we met, I didn't think I'd see you here. Not like this, because I was holding a tray. No, he said. Because I thought you were running. People who run don't usually turn around. I wasn't running, she said. I was hiding. There's a difference. He nodded. Fair. They stood in silence for a moment, the wind brushing gently between them. I saw the files, he said. What you and Laurel pulled. And I think I owe you more than a job. She glanced at him. You don't owe me anything. I didn't do this for favors. I know, he said. Then, after a pause, that's what makes you dangerous. She laughed softly. That's becoming a theme. He turned toward her. What are you going to do when this is over? Mara looked out at the city again, her voice quieter. I don't know. I haven't thought past this. For a long time I didn't let myself. You should, he said. You should have more than just a war to fight. There was something in his tone. Not romantic exactly, but not neutral either. A suggestion. A question unspoken. She looked at him. Really looked. What about you, she asked. You built all this. You trusted the wrong people. You almost lost it. I still might, he said. Does it ever feel worth it? Silas looked away, then back at her. Only when I meet someone who reminds me why I started. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was full. Full of things not said. Full of something waiting. I should get back, Mara said finally, breaking the moment gently. He nodded. Me too. As she walked back toward the glass doors, he called after her, Mara. She turned. Don't let anyone dim what you've got, especially not someone like Devon. She held his gaze. I won't. And she didn't look back. Not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't need to. The boardroom felt like glass in tension. Every polished surface, every chair spaced with military precision, it all hummed with a quiet anticipation that nobody dared name. Mara stood at the far end of the room, arms folded over the folder clutched tight to her chest. Laurel sat 2 seats down, tapping silently on a tablet. Silas, in his usual charcoal suit, stood by the window with his back to them all. Devon was late. Not by much, 6 minutes exactly, but enough to draw attention, enough to make everyone wonder. When he finally walked in, it was with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Apologies," he said smoothly. Client call ran over. Mara didn't look at him. Not yet. He took his seat across from her. Calm. Calculated. A man still clinging to control. Silas turned from the window, scanned the room. "We'll keep this short," he said. "There's been an update regarding our pending acquisition of Vertex Tech. One that changes everything." He nodded to Mara. She stepped forward, laying the folder on the table like a card in a high-stakes game. "I've spent the last 6 days reviewing Vertex's financial structure," she said, voice steady, clear. "And what I've found isn't just problematic, it's dangerous." She tapped the tablet Laurel handed her. The screen behind them flickered on, displaying a series of documents, vendor invoices, audit trails, shell company maps. Names and numbers filled the space. 3 vendor companies, Apex Lineage Load Systems and Kester Solutions, have received over $23 million in payments from Vertex in the past 2 years. On paper, they're supply-side service providers. But dig deeper, and they don't exist. No employees, no verifiable office locations, no real transactions. She clicked again. A series of wire transfer logs appeared. All 3 route payments through a Luxembourg-based holding firm, which is indirectly linked to Ross Holdings, a private fund controlled by Caleb Ross. Murmurs filled the room. Devon leaned back in his chair. "These accusations are based on speculative links. Nothing legally conclusive." Mara didn't flinch. "The structure used mirrors what Ross Holdings deployed in the Lockridge fraud case. I know because I was the one who built the original infrastructure before Caleb turned it against me." Silas stepped forward. "These aren't just speculative links, Devon. They're backed by audit trails and third-party confirmations." Laurel stood. "I've reviewed the findings. They hold up. And this morning I verified that Arclight Analytics, one of Vertex's auditing firms, has been submitting 2 versions of their reports, one to our legal team, and a second, altered version to the UK Financial Registry." Devon laughed softly. "So now we're accepting conspiracy theories as due diligence." Mara turned to face him directly. "Your name," she said, "is on the authorization trail for at least 2 of those vendors." That got the room. Devon's expression didn't move, but the shift was visible. His jaw tightened just enough. "That's not proof," he said. "No," Mara agreed. "But this is." She pulled up one final slide. An email thread between Devon and Arclight's lead partner referencing narrative control in the event of executive objection. The timestamp was from 3 weeks before Mara had ever stepped into Silas's restaurant. You could have heard the silence settle across the table like a blanket. Devon finally spoke. "I was trying to protect the deal," he said carefully. "Everyone here knows how volatile these valuations are." One whisper of hesitation, and it all collapses. "I was stabilizing the optics, not fabricating numbers." Silas's voice came low. "You lied, and you let someone like Ross back into my company." "I made a judgment call," Devon said. "And frankly, Silas, you weren't paying attention. You've been too distracted lately to see what needed to be done." Mara flinched. The implication was clear. Silas stared at him. "You're right," he said. "I was distracted. But not anymore." He looked around the room. "As of today, the acquisition is frozen, effective immediately. Vertex will receive notice of review. Arclight will be removed from the process and will begin internal audit proceedings. Devon, your access is suspended pending legal counsel review." The color drained from Devon's face. "You can't." "I just did," Silas said. Devon stood. But this time there was no confidence in it, no performance, just quiet disbelief. He left the room. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Silas exhaled, looked at Mara. The room was still full of eyes, still filled with the weight of what had just happened. But for a moment it felt like it was just the two of them. "You didn't just expose him," he said. "You saved this company." "I didn't do it for the company," she said softly. He nodded. "I know." The meeting ended. One by one, the board members filed out, quiet, unreadable. Laurel stayed behind. She walked up to Mara and placed a hand lightly on her arm. "That was something." "Is that your legal assessment?" Mara asked, half smiling. Laurel nodded. "And my personal one?" Mara looked down at the table, her hand still slightly trembling. "I thought I'd feel relieved," she said. "But I just feel tired." "That's how you know it mattered," Laurel said gently. Silas hadn't left yet. He stood again by the window, hands in his pockets, gaze on the skyline. Mara walked over. He didn't speak right away. Neither did she. Then he said, "He was right about one thing." She glanced at him. "I was distracted," he said, "because of you." She didn't move. "Not in a bad way," he added. "Just not in a way I planned for." She let that settle. "I didn't plan any of this either." He looked at her, and for the first time there was no guarded edge in his voice, no CEO mask, just a man standing in the aftermath of something hard, something that shook his walls. "You're not who I expected," he said quietly. "Neither are you." And for the first time in years, Mara allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, trust didn't have to be a weakness. The following days moved like a tide, rising with meetings, falling with exhaustion, always pulling Mara toward something deeper she couldn't quite name. On paper, the crisis had been contained. Devon was out. The acquisition was paused. Internal reviews were underway. Yet tension still coiled around the office like fog that wouldn't lift. Mara could feel it in the glances, in the way conversations quieted when she entered a room. Not with hostility, but curiosity. People didn't know what to make of her. One day she was a waitress with nothing to lose. The next, she was the reason the company hadn't walked into a multi-million-dollar disaster. She wasn't a whisper anymore. She was a story. And stories made people nervous. She tried to stay focused. Most of her hours were spent combing through compliance documents, tracing any lingering links to Ross Holdings, and helping Laurel build an airtight case file in case legal action was needed. But her mind kept drifting. To Silas. To the way he'd stood beside her after the boardroom showdown, not as a CEO defending his company, but as a man quietly acknowledging something he hadn't expected to feel. Trust. And maybe more than that. Now, standing in the elevator with a folder pressed to her chest, she felt it again, the ache of something unfinished. The doors opened to the executive floor. She stepped out, walked toward Silas's office. The door was open. He was alone. He looked up as she entered, the faintest smile touching his lips. "Didn't expect to see you up here this late," he said. "It's not late," Mara replied. "You're just used to people disappearing after 5. He gestured for her to sit. She didn't. "I've been thinking," she said, voice softer now, "about everything." He leaned back, listening. "I came here thinking I'd just spot a few red flags, keep my head down, and disappear again. But it didn't go that way." "No," he said. "It didn't." She paused. "I'm not used to people believing me when it matters. Not anymore." Silas stood, slowly walked around the desk until he was standing across from her. "I didn't believe you because I was supposed to. I believed you because I saw the truth in your eyes before I ever saw it in your files." Mara's eyes met his. And now she asked, "What do you see?" Silas studied her for a moment. I see someone who's trying to figure out if she's allowed to stay. Not just in this building, but in her own story. That landed hard. Mara looked down, blinking once. You said I reminded you why you started all this. I did. And what if I told you? You reminded me why I stopped running. Silas stepped closer. Then I'd ask you to stop for real this time. The silence that followed was heavy with meaning, but neither reached across the last few inches of space between them. Not yet. Instead, Mara took a breath and handed him the folder. This is the last of it, she said. All the data points, all the flags, everything I couldn't quite explain when I first got here. Laurel and I double-checked it twice. He took it, but didn't open it. You're done, he asked. With the analysis, yes, but not with what comes next. He tilted his head. Devon's not the end, she said. He's just a door. Caleb's still out there, and if he's this deep already, then someone bigger is backing him. Someone we haven't seen yet. Silas nodded slowly. You think he'll come back? Mara's voice dropped. He never really left. The moment lingered. Then Silas said, There's a retreat, a summit. Private investors, execs, board influencers, the kind of event where handshakes turn into policies. She raised an eyebrow. It's in 2 weeks, he added. And Caleb's going to be there. Ross Holdings sponsors part of the weekend under one of their spin-offs. Mara's pulse quickened. You're going, he nodded. So am I, she said. Silas hesitated. You sure this isn't just data anymore? This is politics. Power. I faced worse, she said. You don't know what it's like to watch someone tear down your life while smiling across a conference table. He nodded. Actually, I'm starting to. She smiled faintly. Then maybe we're both in the right place. They stood there for a moment, quiet again. Then he said something she didn't expect. You scare me, Mara. Her breath caught. Why? Because you make me want something I thought I couldn't have. He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. I'm not here to break anything, she said softly. I don't think you are. She moved toward the door, pausing just before stepping out. Silas. He looked up. I'm not scared of you either. And with that, she was gone. But the weight of her words stayed behind, sinking into the room like the beginning of a promise. Neither of them had spoken out loud yet, but both were starting to believe might be real. The summit was held in Aspen. Private, expensive, hidden behind lodge doors built more for image than insulation. The kind of place where deals happened before they were ever drafted. Where men like Caleb Ross didn't need invitations, they just arrived and were expected. Mara had never been somewhere like this before. Not as herself, anyway. Her badge read, Special Consultant. No company name, no title. Just enough to open doors, not enough to raise questions. She stood by the wide windows of the main lobby looking out over the snow-dusted peaks. The sky was a flat, pale blue, cold and distant. Somewhere behind her, laughter spilled from the bar. Deals were already being made. Laurel appeared at her side, hair tucked neatly beneath a black wool beret. Room checks out, she said, voice low. Secure Wi-Fi isolated router. No bugs we could find. Mara nodded, but her eyes stayed on the mountains. Have you seen him yet? She asked. Laurel hesitated. He's here. Checked in late last night, under a partner firm. Mara finally looked at her. Does he know I'm here? Not yet. Mara turned back to the window. He will. She left Laurel behind and walked the long hallway towards the private conference rooms. Each was marked with neutral names, Aspen a Summit B, but their contents were anything but neutral. Behind each polished oak door, people discussed numbers that affected markets' shifts that would ripple through the country. You didn't need headlines here. You needed proximity. She reached the end of the hall, stopped, took a breath, then walked into Summit C. Silas was already inside. He stood by the fireplace suit more relaxed than usual, no tie-top button undone, but there was nothing casual in his posture. He turned as she entered, and his eyes softened for just a moment. "You came. I said I would." He stepped toward her, then paused. "You look different." Mara glanced down at the soft gray blazer she'd borrowed from Laurel and the boots that still pinched slightly. "It's called trying to look like I belong." "You do," he said. Their eyes held for a beat too long. She looked away first. "What's the plan?" she asked. Silas motioned to the small table near the fireplace. On it sat a tablet, a thin file, and a name badge, Caleb Ross. Ross Holdings. He's scheduled for a breakout panel in an hour. After that, he's hosting a private roundtable. We won't get in unless someone invites us. Then someone will. Silas studied her. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" She didn't answer right away. "I spent 3 years trying to survive the fallout of a man like him. I lost everything. My credibility, my career, my identity. I've been waiting a long time for this." He nodded. "I won't stop you," he said. Mara stepped closer, voice lower now. "But if I do this, Silas, there's no turning it back into numbers and audits. This becomes personal. It already is." His jaw tensed, but not from resistance. "I know." Their eyes met again. The silence between them this time was electric, too full to ignore. She spoke first. "I need to find him." Silas nodded. "He's in the lounge downstairs. Corner table, talking to a pair of tech fund execs." Mara's heart kicked, and then she turned. As she reached the lounge, the warmth hit her first. The fire crackled, the lights dimmed low, and the air buzzed with quiet power, and there he was. Caleb Ross. Same perfect posture, same calculating smile, hair slicked back suit pressed within an inch of arrogance. He was laughing. Mara froze at the threshold. Her breath caught in her throat. For a second she was 28 again, standing in a deposition room watching him discredit everything she'd built with one charming lie after another. Then something hardened in her chest, and she walked forward. Caleb looked up just as she reached the edge of the table. He blinked once, then smiled, not wide, but sharp. "Well," he said slowly, "isn't this a surprise?" His companions looked between them, unsure whether to excuse themselves or stay. "I'd like a word," Mara said, ignoring the others. Caleb leaned back, crossed his legs. "Of course you would. The ghost of Lockridge returns." Mara didn't flinch. "That line worked better 3 years ago. You've run out of places to hide, Caleb." He gestured lazily at the fire, at the view. "Do I look like I'm hiding? You look like a man pretending he still has control." He tilted his head, still chasing revenge, Mara, or just attention. She leaned in voice, low calm. "I'm not here to chase anything. I'm here to make sure the world sees exactly what you are." His smile faltered. "You always were dramatic," he said, "and you always underestimated the wrong woman." She turned without waiting for a response. As she stepped away, she could feel his stare burning between her shoulder blades, not playful now. Not amused, nervous, she liked that. Outside, Silas was waiting. "Well, he asked. He knows," she said. Silas exhaled. "Good." They stood together watching as the sun slipped lower behind the peaks. The turning point wasn't a grand explosion. It wasn't courtroom theatrics or media leaks. It was a quiet confrontation, a shift in power. And Mara knew the next move wouldn't be made behind closed doors. It would be made in the open, where the truth belonged. The sky had turned steel gray by the time Mara returned to her room. Snow had begun to fall, quiet, persistent. The kind that didn't announce itself with a storm, but crept in slow blanketing everything in silence. She sat on the edge of the bed, laptop, open fingers, still from the chill in her chest, not her hands. The confrontation with Caleb had shaken something loose. Not fear, not anymore, but memory. 3 years ago, she'd walked into a courtroom believing truth would win on its own, that facts were enough. But people like Caleb didn't deal in facts. They dealt in doubt, in charm, in the subtle dance of what people wanted to believe versus what was true, and she had paid for believing otherwise. Now she had to do more than expose him. She had to outmaneuver him. A soft knock on the door pulled her out of her thoughts. It opened before she could answer. Silas stood there, a folder in one hand, a look on his face she hadn't seen before. It wasn't guarded. It wasn't careful. It was something closer to bear. "I thought you'd want to see this," he said. She moved aside wordlessly, letting him in. He set the folder on the desk and opened it. "New documents," he said. Laurel flagged them in an old holding account under a different entity name, Arctis Capital. Turns out it's been feeding into Ross Holdings for over a year. Mara leaned over the desk, scanning. They funneled the payments through a series of non-profits, she said, voice low. Brilliant and disgusting. Silas watched her. Not the papers. Her. "You okay?" he asked gently. She nodded, then shook her head. "I don't know. This is what I wanted, what I've worked for, and now that we're this close, all I can think about is how fast it could still fall apart." "It won't. You can't know that." Silas stepped closer. "No. But I know you. And I know the difference between someone who's chasing revenge and someone who's building justice." She met his eyes. And this time, neither of them looked away. "I saw him today," she said quietly. "Face to face. I heard. He tried to laugh it off, said I was chasing attention, like I was still the girl who made a mistake and got in over her head." Silas's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Mara stepped back, pacing slightly. "What if the board doesn't believe it? What if they see this as a grudge match? Then I'll remind them who put the company at risk," he said, "and who saved it." She stopped, turned toward him. "Why are you doing this? What do you mean I'm not your responsibility, Silas? I'm not your employee. I'm not your—" She paused, unsure how to finish. He crossed the room slowly, stopping just in front of her. "You're not any of those things," he said softly. "You're the reason I still believe in building something that matters." Her breath caught. "I've built a life full of power," he continued. "Rooms like these, people like Caleb, they come with that territory, but none of them made me want to fight. Not until you." Mara didn't answer. She couldn't. The moment was too full. Too much. He reached out, hesitated, then tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You don't have to be alone in this," he said. "Not anymore." Her voice broke when she finally spoke. "I don't know how not to be." "Then let me show you." They stood there inches apart, the air between them warm and charged. But Mara stepped back. Not from rejection. From restraint. "We still have work to do," she said. Silas nodded, the shift in his expression respectful but not cold. "You're right. They spent the next hour reviewing the new documents, mapping transfers, building the skeleton of what could become the final case. But every now and then, their hands brushed, their eyes caught, and nothing needed to be said." Later, when the work paused and the snow deepened outside, Silas leaned back in the chair and asked, "What happens after all this?" Mara looked at him. "I honestly don't know. Then start by thinking about what you want." She was quiet. "I think I want a life I don't have to run from," she said. He smiled gently. "That's a good place to start." As the night wore on, silence wrapped around them again, not uncomfortable but full of something fragile and growing. And outside, beneath the thickening snow, the mountain held its breath. Tomorrow the fight would continue, But tonight, they rested. Together. The morning broke quiet and pale, the snow still whispering against the windows. Mara sat by the fire in the lodge's side lounge, her fingers wrapped around a mug of black coffee she hadn't touched. Her laptop rested on her knees, glowing with a spreadsheet she'd memorized hours ago. But she wasn't looking at the numbers. She was thinking about everything that hadn't been said last night, about the weight of Silas's words, about how somehow trust was starting to feel less like a risk and more like a choice. She didn't know what scared her more. A quiet buzz from her phone broke the stillness. A text from Laurel. He moved his meeting. 9:30, private suite, 3rd floor birch room. Mara stood coffee forgotten, the spreadsheet closed with a single click. She grabbed her coat, slipped the phone into her pocket, and headed for the elevator. By the time she reached the 3rd floor, her pulse had settled into a low, steady rhythm, focused, sharp. The hallway was empty, thick carpet muffling every step. At the far end, a pair of glass-paneled doors marked Birch Room waited slightly ajar. She didn't knock. Inside, Caleb stood with his back to the door, hands folded behind him as he looked out at the snowy view. He turned slowly at the sound of her footsteps. I had a feeling you'd show. Mara shut the door gently behind her. I didn't come to play games. Caleb smiled, all teeth and confidence. No, you came to leverage the moment. Silas has you on a leash now, does he? I came because I have proof, she said, walking closer. And because I wanted to see your face when I told you this time I'm not the one who's going to lose. He tilted his head, amused. You always did have flair. But come on, Mara. You and I both know this isn't about justice. It's personal. You want to embarrass me. She held his gaze. It is personal. You wrecked my career. You manipulated numbers, used my name, and buried the truth while I watched everything I built crumble. He stepped closer, too close. And yet, here you are, still standing. Funny how that works. Mara didn't flinch. Not funny. Strategic. I learned from you. Caleb's smile flickered a crack in the armor. She pulled a USB from her pocket and held it up. This contains transaction trails offshore routing shell corporations linked to Ross Holdings and a correspondence log connecting you directly to falsified reporting across 3 deals. He didn't move. You can threaten, you can spin. But the story is written, she continued. And this time I get to tell it. For the first time since she walked in, Caleb's posture shifted, subtle but clear. You think Silas will go public with that? He's still one of us, Mara. He plays the long game. Not this time, she said. He saw what you are. He's done protecting you. And what about you? Caleb asked, voice suddenly soft. You really think once this blows up you'll be celebrated? You'll always be the woman who burned the house down. Mara stepped back, her voice calm. Maybe. But at least I won't be the man who kept building with stolen bricks. She turned and walked out without another word. Downstairs, the lobby was filling with summit attendees. Name tags, handshakes, smiles stretched just wide enough. But Mara didn't see them. She saw Silas standing near the check-in desk, deep in quiet conversation with one of the investor board members. He looked up just as she approached. It's done, she said. He searched her face. How'd he take it? Like a man who thought the rules didn't apply to him. Silas nodded. They never do. Until someone draws the line. Mara handed him the USB. This is the line. He took it carefully, closing his fingers around it like something fragile. They didn't speak for a moment. Then Silas said, I need to take this to the board. I won't hide behind closed doors. If this breaks, it breaks clean. I'll stand with you, Mara said. You sure? She nodded. I've spent enough of my life being silent. He gave her a look she wouldn't forget, not gratitude but respect. Something weightier. Then he left. Mara stepped outside. The cold bit at her skin, but she didn't care. She needed the air. She stared out at the snowy expanse, her breath rising in clouds. A flicker of doubt stirred in her chest, but it didn't root itself. Not this time. The truth was no longer something she chased in the dark. It was in the open now, and it was hers. Behind her, the door opened again. Laurel appeared, gloves in hand, coat zipped high. "You okay?" she asked. Mara gave a small nod. "I will be. You sure you want to go public?" "Yes." Laurel studied her. "Then let's make it count." Together they walked back inside. Not to hide. Not to survive. But to finish what they started. The conference room on the top floor of the lodge had been cleared for a private board session. Thick wooden doors, insulated for privacy, muffled the distant noise of the summit downstairs. A long table stretched down the center, lined with leather chairs. Silas stood at the head of it. 12 board members sat facing him, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. Some were old allies. Some had always been cautious. But none of them were prepared for what he was about to do. Mara sat just behind him, quiet but steady, the USB drive resting beside her laptop. She wasn't here as an outsider anymore. She was part of this. Silas looked around the room. He didn't hold notes. He didn't need them. "I've asked you here," he began, "because I need to speak plainly, not as your CEO, but as someone who has built this company with the belief that what we stand for matters more than how much we profit." A few heads nodded slowly. "We've discovered a pattern of financial misconduct tied directly to the Vertex acquisition and indirectly to Ross Holdings." A murmur rippled through the room. Silas continued. "These aren't minor oversights. They're deliberate. Constructed to mislead, to funnel funds through shell entities, and to cover the tracks of a man we once called a partner." He nodded to Mara. She stood, hands slightly trembling, as she plugged in the USB and opened the files on the large wall screen. Line by line, the data unfolded: payment trails, altered audit reports, offshore transfers. No one spoke for several minutes. Then one board member, Janet Lynn Sharp and respected, cleared her throat. "Who was involved internally?" she asked. Silas didn't hesitate. "Devon. He authorized multiple vendor connections without proper verification. He misrepresented due diligence and withheld findings from the board." "Do we have documentation?" Mara clicked once. The screen changed. "Yes," she said. "Email chains, logins, timestamps. We've verified everything." Janet looked at Silas. "You're proposing we go public." "I'm not proposing," he said. "I'm informing. We don't fix this behind the curtain. We don't wait to see how the market reacts. We lead by acknowledging the mistake and taking action before anyone else demands it." Another board member, Richard Chase, leaned forward. "This will cost us." "Yes," Silas agreed, "but not as much as staying quiet." Silence settled again. Then Mara spoke, her voice calm but direct. "I lost everything because I stayed silent once. And I know what that silence buys: time power, the illusion of control. But it also eats at you, and it erodes trust from the inside out." She looked each of them in the eye. "You don't get to build something real if you're always patching holes in the foundation. It hung there. Real. Unapologetic." After a long pause, Janet nodded. "I support going public." One by one, the others followed. A vote wasn't even necessary. It was unanimous. When the room finally emptied, only Mara and Silas remained. He leaned against the edge of the table, his shoulders slumping slightly with the release of tension. She walked over, standing beside him. "You did it," she said softly. "We did it." There was a beat of silence. Then he looked at her. Really looked. "You were right about him," he said. "From the start." Mara smiled faintly. "I wish I hadn't been." Silas nodded, then reached out slowly, brushing his fingers against hers. And now he asked, "What comes next?" She looked down at their hands, then back up at him. I want to stop surviving and start living." He took that in, let it settle. Then he said, "I'd like to be part of that. If you'll let me." Mara didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped in just a little closer, until there was no distance between them. Until the silence said what neither had found the courage to say before. She whispered, "You already are." They didn't kiss. Not yet. But something passed between them deeper than touch, more certain than words. Outside, the snowfall began to slow, the sky clearing little by little. Tomorrow the news would break. Tomorrow the world would change. But tonight they had done what mattered. They had chosen truth, and in doing so found something even more unexpected, each other. The press release went live at 7:04 a.m. By 7:12, the company's internal channels were flooded. By 8:00, major outlets were running headlines. Not rumors, not speculation, just the truth, clean, clear, undeniable. Lockridge Holdings had discovered internal fraud. The CEO had launched a full-scale audit. Legal action was underway. The company would cooperate fully with authorities and make all financials available for review. There were no excuses, no spin, just accountability. Mara read it once on her phone. Then again, slower. Not because she didn't believe it, but because part of her had stopped believing this moment could ever come. A knock at her hotel door broke her focus. She opened it to find Laurel holding a warm paper bag and 2 coffees. "Figured we deserved something better than instant oatmeal and nerves." Mara stepped aside with a smile. "You're a hero." They sat by the window overlooking the snow-covered trees. The world outside was crisp and bright, like it had been rinsed clean. "You really did it," Laurel said, unwrapping her breakfast sandwich. "No more waiting, no more hiding." Mara took a sip of coffee. "It doesn't feel real yet. It will." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that only comes between people who've fought side by side. Mara leaned her head back against the wall and let herself feel it, relief, exhaustion, and something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. "I'm proud of you," Laurel said quietly. Mara looked over, touched. "I wouldn't have made it here without you." Laurel smiled. "You would have. Might have taken longer. But you would have." Later that morning, Mara packed her things and checked out. She stepped into the crisp air suitcase in hand, heart lighter than it had been in years. Silas was waiting by the car. He wasn't in a suit today. Just dark jeans, a charcoal sweater, and a jacket that looked like it had seen real weather. He looked ordinary, which somehow made him look more himself than ever. "I was worried you'd leave without saying goodbye," he said. "I almost did," she replied. "But I didn't want to." He took her bag and placed it in the trunk, then leaned against the car, watching her. "So he said what now?" She smiled gently. "That's the question, isn't it? You could come back to the city," he said. "Stay on as an advisor. Or not. We'll support whatever you want to do." She stepped closer. "It's strange. For so long, everything I did was about proving something, fighting for space, for my name. And now that it's done, I'm not sure who I am without the fight." Silas nodded. "Maybe that's the point. You get to decide." She looked out over the trees, snow still resting on the branches like powdered sugar. "I think I need time," she said. "Not to run, but to breathe. To figure out what kind of life I want to build now that I finally have the chance." Silas studied her. "You've earned it." Then, after a pause, he added, "I'd like to be part of that life, if there's space for me." Mara smiled, soft and certain. "There is. Just not in the way you're used to." He chuckled. "I think I'm ready for that." She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, slow, intentional. He held her tightly, chin resting gently on the top of her head. It wasn't the kind of hug that promised everything would be easy. It was the kind that promised they'd try. When they pulled apart, she reached into her coat pocket and handed him a small envelope. "What's this A-list of non-profit firms I want you to consider backing?" she said. "Financial literacy, whistleblower protections, women in finance. Real change, not PR fluff." He opened it, scanned the names. "This is a serious list. I'm not interested in window dressing." He nodded. "Neither am I." She gave his hand one final squeeze, then turned toward the waiting rideshare at the curb. As she climbed in, Silas called out, "Where are you going?" She smiled through the window. "Home, wherever that turns out to be." And then she was gone. The ride was quiet, scenic. No calls, no noise, just the sound of tires crunching over packed snow and the distant hum of possibility. Mara leaned back, watching the sky stretch out ahead of her. The road twisted gently along the ridgeline, sun glinting off the ice in little shards of light. She didn't know exactly where she'd land next, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of the unknown. She was walking into it with her eyes open, heart steady, and head high. Not as a victim, not even as a survivor, but as someone who told the truth and changed everything because of it. And that was enough. More than enough.